I'm John Heilemann, and this is the Hell and High Water Podcast.
This week's guest, illusionist, performance artist, Derek DelGaudio.
Hi, I'm Derek DelGaudio, and the state of our union is turbulent, to say the least. A lot of people say we are living in two different Americas. I believe we are living in as many Americas as there are people in this country. And unless we find a way to find some common ground, we're in trouble.
How would you describe the show before I give my own opinion of it here?
It's sort of a theatrical existential crisis, I guess. In this show, magic and illusion are used as sort of a metaphor for identity and the things that we can and cannot see about each other.
And I had the most extraordinary experience in this show. I'd never had this before, is that I've been to shows that deeply moved me, but I've never been to a show where at the end of it, I didn't want to move. I didn't even want to applaud because I was so captured by the last moments of this play that I felt like there was a thin layer of still air all around my body that I didn't want to disrupt.
Is that why you weren't applauding?
You were watching.
Okay, yes.
You were watching.
So that's Stephen Colbert and Derek DelGaudio, our guest today on Hell and High Water, back in November of 2017, partway through the theatrical run of In and of Itself. Derek, it's good to see you. Thank you for being on the show today. And I kind of wanted to start with that just because, well, first of all, it gets at a thing that I've now watched like a lot of video about with you trying to talk about this show. And I have to say, you and Stephen obviously have had an ongoing discussion of like what the show's really about. And it seems like after all these years, you still haven't really, you guys have made kind of have a running joke about your inability to really describe it for anybody who hasn't seen it.
It's utter failure. Utter failure by design. I mean, I set out to make a show that was difficult to describe, and we were a victim of our own success.
Do you feel like this is a thing? Obviously, you did 552 performances of it.
Yeah, in New York, yeah.
In New York, and then you made the movie of it. Does it feel like to you, and it's still relatively recently in your rearview mirror, but do you feel like this is the kind of thing where this piece of work is going to kind of be with you forever in the way that it feels like it's going to be with me forever?
Yeah, I mean, it changed me, and it changed how I see the world and my life externally and internally. So yeah, it'll be with me for as long as I live, I believe.
So why don't you say a little bit about how you now, having had all this practice at trying to describe it for people who have both seen it and haven't, how you now talk about it so that you can unlock the discussion of how it changed you? Because it must have,
Sure.
Given the nature of the material and how many times you've done it.
Sure. I mean, I was thinking about the nature of identity and what it means to be and be seen in this world, and how self is related to others and how we create identity, not just on our own, but between ourselves and other individuals. And it was a very personal endeavor. And then it turned out that it's an issue that everyone struggles with on some level. And so what began as a very personal journey quickly expanded, and people saw what I was doing, what I was working on, and they kind of jumped in to help. And I was very fortunate to be surrounded by other great creative people and talented artists and makers who helped me bring it to life. And it's kind of a modern allegory, really.
For those who haven't seen it, one of the elements of it is that audience members walk in the door and choose a card that has an identifier for how they see themselves, whether they take that seriously or not. I think you probably saw audience members who took, I mean, I think at one point you sort of indicate you want people who took it seriously versus people who didn't take it seriously, to kind of distinguish between themselves. Because there's obviously some split. Some people who kind of look at that as picked a name, I'm a seeker, I'm a joker, yeah. I'm a midnight toker, whatever, as a kind of a joke, and others who are looking for something that was more earnest.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to level the playing field. I mean, most people went into that room either not knowing who I was or knowing only what they've read in the playbill, or maybe they heard about it on, from a friend or something like that. But I knew I wanted to make it so that if they were going to start defining me before I even saw them, it was a two-way street. I wanted them to flatten themselves to being one thing, so that we met on equal ground the first time we saw each other face to face. And so I wanted to start that dialogue before they even, got into the room, get them in that headspace of thinking about who am I? Who do I think I am? How do I think others see me? How do I want to be seen? How do I want to be perceived in this world? And so that was just a way to get them to start thinking about it before I ever said a word.
And for anybody who didn't know, what they mostly knew about you probably was you were a magician. That's what they thought, right? That was that was for a lot of people who didn't know very much about you. That's the label that they put on you. And you have kind of an uneasy relationship with that, which I'd love you to talk about as a first pass, because it seems like that was what a lot of the baggage that people were walking in the door with would have been. Oh, Derek DelGaudio, great magician, one of the world's great magicians.
Yeah, I mean, that was in essence a hurdle in terms of the perception of what they thought I was. And so I have a background in sleight of hand and illusions and deception and things like that. And so I knew that based on that knowledge, based on a label, something like magician, they would have already decided things about me, about what they were about to see, just based on that simple label. One of those things was presuming that everything that I said was patter or not true, or something just there to fill time or perhaps pull attention away from what I was actually trying to achieve, kind of the opposite of what I was there for. And so that was kind of a wake-up call as to how difficult it was going to be to actually bridge that gap and get people to listen just based on who they think I am or what they think I do and their perception of the word magician. And so, that was part of it, getting people to look past that or try to get past that notion of what they believe a magician is, so that they can actually hear what I'm there to say. And on the flip side of it, knowing that they wouldn't believe me gave me an advantage in a sense, because all I needed to do was tell the truth in most cases, knowing that they were going to lie to themselves based on what they thought I was. I spent, most of my youth chasing Ricky's coattails, to say the least, and worshipped at the altar of Ricky J.
People frequently talk about how much more difficult it is to cheat in a card game than to perform good sleight of hand. But if you think about it, what makes magic different is that it's inherently honest. That's the major difference between deception as crime and deception as performance. In the performance of magic, in sleight of hand, you tell someone you're going to deceive them before you deceive them. That's really difficult, to tell someone you're going to fool them, to have them on guard and aware, and then to still fool them. It really is a very peculiar profession.
A very peculiar profession from a very, I guess some would say peculiar, but also just an incredibly captivating man, Ricky J. Talk to me about Ricky J. You worked on at least one show with Ricky J, I think. Tell me, someone a hero of yours, someone you admired, someone who you emulated, someone like tell me about that, about your view of him and what it was like to work with him.
I mean, I spent, most of my youth chasing Ricky's coattails, to say the least, and, worshipped at the altar of Ricky J. But he does not like people who do the same thing that he did. So he was always reluctant to speak to other magicians or especially younger magicians who wanted to learn things. And he was very guarded. So it took a long time and a lot of, doing the right thing, and a lot of sitting outside the front door of the master studio for a week with no food, no water, that sort of thing. Like, I had to earn my seat at whatever table he was sitting at. But he was a real artist. Like the term sleight of hand artist is used to describe what people often do, but there are very few artists who do sleight of hand, and Ricky was definitely one of them, and definitely the most influential for me growing up in terms of what could be done with this, what can be done with sleight of hand and illusions and conjuring. He took it kind of as far as we'd ever seen it go before, as far as culturally. He genuinely loved the art of magic and conjuring, and it caused him, more. It is both the thing that gave him the most love and pain, I think, of anything in his entire life.
I remember reading, so you would have been a little kid, 1993. Mark Singer wrote this story in the New Yorker.
Sure.
About Ricky Jay, which I know anybody who's Ricky Jay, everybody's read this piece, but at the time I wrote for the New Yorker for a little while in my life, and like in the annals of New Yorker writers, of New Yorker stories, like when people at the New Yorker would talk about like the greatest profiles that have ever run in the magazine, which is quite like it's a fairly like a fairly exalted status, right? To be in the, what are like the best handful of New Yorker profiles in the history of the magazine? People talk about this Mark Singer piece about Ricky Jay, and I remember reading it when it came out, and it was the first, I'd never heard of Ricky Jay. I think I'd seen him maybe in a couple of David Mamet movies, but I remember reading the profile and being totally captivated by how interesting the guy was. Was like in the trajectory of your attraction to sleight of hand, again, we're starting in this kind of access point to talk about a moral man. Where did you come upon Ricky Jay? Was that like in the art, in the genesis of your interest in these topics? Was that in an early phase, or were you already hooked by the time you found out about Ricky Jay and started to become obsessed in the way that you just described?
No, I saw Ricky's a VHS of Ricky's 52 Assistants show, which had aired on HBO back in the day. A friend of mine, I didn't have HBO, but a friend of mine did. And he recorded it on a VHS tape for me, and I watched it when I was 13 years old. And I did know that I was seeing, I hadn't even seen that much, but I knew that I was seeing someone who this was as far as it has been or could go. I mean, it was so clear from his use of language, and not just his hands, which were great, but everything was right.
The 7 of diamonds from the 6 to the 7 of diamonds, and the gentleman on the end. 10 of spades. The 10 of spades. We're going to find the next card by means of a simple cut. And that is the ace of clubs, the card the woman on the aisle took. Your ace of clubs. Your card was, you're shaking your head no?
No.
Ace of clubs? What was it?
4 of diamonds.
If you insist.
And you just watch someone who not only was a master of their craft, but who treated it with the dignity and respect that you rarely see. And that was what stood out to me as someone who wasn't just good at this, but he cared about it so much. He never allowed it to be in anything other than the best possible light, because he felt it deserved it. Not him, but this thing separate from him that he happened to know about and be a part of was worth sharing, and it was worth sharing in the best possible light. Unless we find a way to look beyond these labels and these words that we've chosen to categorize ourselves, we might be fucked.
I'll never forget the first time I saw someone perform sleight of hand. I'd like to say it was love at first sight, but I fell in love with all the things I couldn't see, and I had to learn. So I started with the very basics. How do you hold a deck of cards properly? And then I read it would take 8 years to learn how to hold a deck of cards properly. 8 years. And which grip are you going to learn to hold them in? You're going to learn the mechanic's grip, full grip, straddle grip, box grip, dealer grip. I couldn't decide, so I just learned them all.
That sound we played comes at a moment when you are discussing basically your time where you're learning sleight of hand, and there's the question of wolf versus dog. Are you a wolf or are you a dog?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the dog is the nice creature, and the wolf is the threatening creature. And really, Amoral Man, the book, is really about your time on the wolf side, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm oversimplifying
No,
here, but that is really what that is, right? You are a wolf. That's when you're a card mechanic.
That is true. It is that exploring that duality, which of the dog and wolf, of a moral man, a moral man. Those are the same exploration there. It's just a deeper dive with the book.
Talk about like why you wrote the book and what it's about. Like what it's not just the stories in it, but what the point of it was.
I guess fundamentally it's about the nature of reality and what we call truth and how we perceive truth and our position, our relationship to truth and how that's created around us. And I thought of it while actually watching the Brett Kavanaugh hearing was the first time that I realized that there was a story that I should probably tell to help maybe put some of what we're seeing in the world today into some sort of context.
You mentioned the Kavanaugh thing, so I'll read the tweet that you sent out at the time, which got, people noticed. I remember, covering this myself, and I remember seeing this tweet, not really knowing that much about who you were, knowing a little bit, but seeing this thing that said, the tweet was, this August 2018, the tweet was, I used to rig card games for a living. I'd watch people sit down and lose everything again and again, but they didn't lose because they played by the rules and we didn't. They lost because it wasn't a game. It just looked like one. Democrats think it's a game. You're kind of making the point, which is like, it's not really that like Republicans play the game better than Democrats play the game. It's that Republicans that there really isn't a game that's being played here. And in fact, Republicans are better at running the simulation of a game than Democrats are. And Democrats keep falling into the trap of thinking it actually is a game.
Yeah. And
with rules.
Yeah. And thinking that if we perform the actions of what appears to be a game, to signal that to the people watching, then it appears as if it's on the up and up, but really it's just robbing a bank. You said earlier, like the subjectivity of truth is the crisis of our time. I believe that because we can't even begin to fix the climate or this pandemic and without that. And it's clearly that is the hurdle that allows us to even, prevents us from overcoming any of these obstacles that we're facing. That comes first of a discussion of what is true and how do we sway the narrative to better to better humanity. The Democrats, if anything, are just terrible at swaying the narrative and they think that explaining things with facts is going to help when really the Republicans can just get one good buzzword and can change the narrative in a day. And that's actually a skill set that they have that I think is dismissed. It's dismissed by Democrats that, words have power, abracadabra is, I say therefore I create, and they're doing that. They're changing the world around us based on the language that they're choosing to use. And it has nothing to do with reality. And I feel like until we figure out a way of acknowledging that and talking about it in a meaningful way, we're going to be stuck.
The book is in some ways the prequel to In and of Itself, and in some ways the experiences that you recount in the book are the experiences that serve as the kind of jumping off point for what ultimately is the direction that you pursue that leads ultimately to In and of Itself. The movie came out on January 22nd, right? 2 days after Joe Biden was inaugurated. Mm-hmm. I remember Colbert in some later thing, Stephen, who ends up being an executive producer of the movie. He sees we played at the beginning. He saw you on stage, loved it, became a backer, became an executive producer, helped this thing helped the Hulu special get made. When you hear Stephen say that he thinks that your piece, that In and of Itself, is very much of this moment. What does that mean to you? When you hear that, you think, yeah, it really is of this moment. In what ways? Is that resonant for you when you hear him say that?
Well, I experienced it in real time, in that the show was different when I started than where it ended up. I started it in 2015 before the election, or that's when I started writing it. And then 2016 came and I started doing it. And so I was doing the show when the election came around, and then after the election moved to New York and started doing it in New York, and again experienced it in different waves. And how people came to the work varied depending on what was going on in the world. And the real moment that it became very clear was after Charlottesville, where the people started, what they chose at the wall when they first walked in changed like the next day. Like, and there was no more, unicorn. There was no more, space cowboy. It was people, for whatever reason, realized that what we call ourselves and what we call each other matters. Really, really matters. And how we choose to identify ourselves and put labels on one another is life or death. It's not just, oh, I don't want to be called that. It's what we call each other has absolute consequences. And that just became clear in the relation with the world. I had a small section of a small sample of people every night that I got to interact with. And this concept of what we call ourselves and how we choose to divide ourselves is everything, and how we identify and what we identify with and with whom we identify is everything. And it's how we're shaping this country, and it's how we shape our circles. And so maybe that's what he was referring to, is that, like, unless we find a way to look beyond these labels and these words that we've chosen to categorize ourselves, we might be fucked. You've been covering politics for long enough where you've seen the meaning of the words Democrat and Republican change from time to time, what that actually means, and how, what progressive actually means definitely shifts and changes, and what conservative means changes. But, like, we have never seen such a stark, I think, an immediate change of these titles, where it happens before our eyes, where what it meant to be a Republican, with George W. Bush, and how I or others felt about that word then versus now. I mean, we are seeing how quickly and how powerfully, we can transform the meaning of a thing. And by changing the meaning of a label, we change the meaning of an entire community and how we perceive that community, not just the individual, but what it means for that entire group of now. When someone identifies as a Republican, it says a lot more than it did to me several years ago. And
yes,
and it's really, really tragic.
Yeah, and I guess 100%. And I've got to get, it takes you into, we could again go down a whole bunch of different paths here. One of which is, I think about, those identifiers on that wall and people walking in and choosing something. You and I have sort of, the notion that part of what in and of itself is about the complexity of identity, and about no one thing being your identity never being able to be reduced to a single thing. That's the part of the message of the work, and yet you have as a kind of, you make an explicit move to, like, make people choose one word. There's a paradoxical element to that, especially at the end of the show, where you go through and name people according to what they've chosen.
One of the joys of that experience in that moment is the moment before I say something, when you're wondering yourself, what is this person, how does this person see themselves? And, when a black guy chose Republican, no one saw that answer coming. So when I say it and he confirms it, it's a reckoning for all of us. And and that is one of the many reckonings that this country is going through right now, where we are having revealed to us in real time daily these contradictions and paradoxes and entanglements that we've created for ourselves, and that we cannot just remove people. We cannot just demand that people separate themselves from their beliefs and who they are and their value systems. We have to find ways of existing, together and coexisting with those beliefs. But the least we can do is decide on what it means to tell the truth.
Derek DelGaudio, the man, the myth, the legend, presiding genius behind In and of Itself, and Amoral Man, or Amoral Man, however they're supposed to say it both ways. That's a contingent title, a title that could kind of just like this conversation we were just having, could say it either way and it works.
Yep.
Thank you for taking the time today. to be on Hell and High Water. If you haven't seen the movie on Hulu, I gotta say, by this point, if you still haven't seen it,
wow,
time to I don't know what the fuck's wrong with you. Go watch it right now. You'll blow your mind. Derek, thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much, John.